The message arrived at 3 in the morning, ship time, and it changed everything for humanity forever. Ambassador Alara Chun sat alone in her small cabin aboard the starship Perseverance when the holographic display flickered to life without warning, and she watched as alien symbols transformed into words she could understand. Words that made her heart beat faster than it had in years. The Galactic Concord had finally agreed to hear humanity's request for membership. And after 30 years of waiting, after decades of being ignored and dismissed, the greatest assembly of intelligent species in the known universe would listen to what humans had to say. Alara read the message 3 times before she believed it was real. And then she sat in silence for a long moment, thinking about what this meant for every man, woman, and child back on Earth. Thinking about the weight that now rested on her shoulders alone. She was 52 years old, a former teacher who had become a diplomat. A woman who had spent her entire adult life preparing for a moment that most people said would never come. And now that moment was here, waiting for her among the stars. The Perseverance was humanity's first true interstellar vessel. A ship that had taken 20 years to build and represented the hopes and dreams of an entire species. And Alara was its only passenger on this historic journey. She stood and walked to the small window that looked out into the endless darkness of space. And she thought about Earth, so far away now, a tiny blue marble lost somewhere behind her in the vast ocean of stars. The aliens had been watching humanity for a long time. She knew, studying them from afar like scientists observing bacteria under a microscope. And what they saw had not impressed them at all. To the ancient species of the Galactic Concord, humans were nothing special. Just another young race crawling out of the mud on a dangerous planet. A species that would probably destroy itself before it ever reached the stars. Earth was what the aliens called a death world, a planet of extreme temperatures and violent weather. A place filled with predators and diseases and natural disasters that should have killed humanity 1,000 times over. And yet somehow humans had survived and even thrived. The Concord had been watching and waiting, expecting humans to blow themselves up with nuclear weapons or poison their own planet beyond repair. But humanity had surprised them by doing neither. And now the aliens had no choice but to acknowledge that these strange creatures from the dangerous little planet were not going away. 3 weeks later, the Perseverance arrived at the Concord's great station, and Alara felt her breath catch in her throat as she saw it for the first time through the cockpit window. The station was enormous beyond anything she had ever imagined. A structure of crystal and light that orbited a neutron star, spinning slowly in the glow of that ancient dead sun like a jewel made by gods. Thousands of ships surrounded it, vessels of every shape and size, belonging to the 47 species that made up the Galactic Concord. And among them all, the Perseverance looked like a child's toy. Small and simple and almost embarrassingly primitive. Alara docked her ship and stepped out into the station. And immediately she felt the weight of alien eyes upon her. Dozens of species watching her with curiosity and contempt and something that might have been pity. She was the only human for light years in any direction. A single representative of her entire species. And as she walked through the grand corridors of crystal toward the assembly chamber, she forced herself to keep her head high and her steps steady. The chamber itself was a vast circular room that could hold 10,000 beings. And when Alara entered, she saw that it was nearly full. Representatives from across the galaxy gathered to witness the moment when humanity would beg for acceptance into their ancient club. She walked to the center of the room, to a small platform that seemed designed to make whoever stood on it feel tiny and insignificant. And she waited as the noise of alien voices slowly faded into silence. The high speaker of the Concord rose from its throne at the far end of the chamber, and Alara studied the being with careful eyes, taking in the crystalline body that seemed to be made of living glass. the facets that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows across the walls. The HFY were one of the oldest species in the galaxy. Beings of silicon and light who had been traveling the stars when Earth was still a ball of molten rock. And their high speaker was the leader of the entire Concord, a being whose word was law among the stars. When the high speaker spoke, its voice rang through the chamber like the chiming of 1,000 bells, beautiful and terrible at the same time, and every being in the room listened in absolute silence. "We have gathered here to consider the petition of humanity," the high speaker announced, its crystalline form pulsing with soft blue light. A young species from a small planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, who wished to join the galactic concord and take their place among the civilized peoples of the universe. Alara heard the subtle mockery in those words, the way the high speaker dismissed Earth as unremarkable and humans as young, and she felt a flicker of anger in her chest that she quickly pushed down. "Before we consider this petition," the high speaker continued, turning its faceted face toward Alara in a way that made her feel like an insect under a magnifying glass, "we must ask the human representative a simple question, one that every species must answer before they can be welcomed into our assembly." The chamber fell completely silent, and Alara could feel every eye and sensor and receptor in the room focused on her, waiting for the question that would determine the fate of her entire species. The high speaker's form flickered with colors that Alara could not name, and when it spoke again, its voice was cold and sharp as broken glass. Why should the galactic concord admit a species so young, so violent, and so temporary? Why should we welcome beings who live such brief and chaotic lives, who wage war against each other over trivial matters, who destroy their own world even as they reach for the stars? Why, human, should we accept you? The question hung in the air like a blade, and Alara stood alone in the center of 10,000 alien beings, knowing that everything she said next would echo through history forever. She took a deep breath and prepared to answer. But before she could speak, a voice from the crowd interrupted, and a new figure rose to address the assembly. And Alara realized with a sinking heart that her trial had only just begun. The being that rose from the crowd was unlike anything Alara had ever seen. A creature made entirely of writhing tentacles and pulsing organs, its body shifting and changing shape as it moved toward the center of the chamber. This was a delegate from the Morvax collective, she realized, one of the oldest and most powerful species in the Concord, a hive mind that shared thoughts across billions of bodies scattered throughout the galaxy. Before the human answers, the Morvax delegate announced in a voice that sounded like 1,000 people speaking at once. The collective demands that the assembly review the evidence against this species. The evidence that proves they are not worthy to stand among us. A murmur of approval rippled through the chamber, and Alara felt her stomach drop as she understood what was happening, as she realized that this was not going to be a simple hearing but a trial, a public condemnation of everything humanity had ever done. The high speaker nodded its crystalline head, and the Morvax delegate began to speak, and what followed was the longest 3 hours of Alara's life. "The humans are a species of war," the Morvax declared, projecting holographic images into the air above the assembly, images of battlefields and explosions in cities burning in the night. They have fought each other constantly since the dawn of their civilization, killing millions of their own kind over land and resources and ideas. The images changed to show soldiers marching, bombs falling, nuclear mushroom clouds rising over destroyed cities. And Alara forced herself to watch without looking away, forced herself to bear witness to the worst of her species' history. They created weapons capable of destroying their entire world, the Morvax continued, its many voices dripping with disgust. And they came within moments of using them, not once but many times. saved only by luck and accident from annihilating themselves completely. Another delegate rose, this one a tall insectoid being with compound eyes that reflected the light in 1,000 different directions, a representative of the Kethra Dominion. "The humans are destroyers of worlds," the Kethra delegate declared. Adding its voice to the condemnation, "They have poisoned their own planet's air and water. They have driven countless species to extinction. They have torn down forests and filled their oceans with waste." More images appeared, showing polluted rivers and dead coral reefs and mountains of garbage, showing the scars that humanity had left upon their own world. And Alara felt shame burning in her chest, even as she stood tall and refused to bow her head. A third delegate rose, this one a being of pure light and energy, a Raylathi, one of the most advanced species in the known universe, creatures who had transcended physical form millions of years ago. "The humans are primitive and emotional," the Raylathi declared, its voice echoing directly in Alara's mind, bypassing her ears entirely. "They are driven by chemical reactions in their brains, by hormones and instincts that they cannot control, by feelings that cloud their judgment and lead them to irrational actions." The Raylathi projected images of humans laughing and crying and screaming in anger, images that were meant to show how foolish and uncontrolled human emotions were. They form attachments to dangerous predators and call them pets. The Raylathi continued with obvious contempt, showing images of humans hugging dogs and cats and even wolves and bears. They bond with creatures that could kill them, treating deadly animals as members of their own families, a clear sign of mental instability. More delegates rose, one after another, each adding their voice to the chorus of condemnation, each listing another of humanity's many flaws and failures. The Drexy senator was the worst of all, a being that had long ago uploaded its consciousness into a mechanical body, a creature that had achieved immortality through technology and looked down on all biological life as inferior. "The humans are mayflies," the Drexy declared, its synthetic voice cold and emotionless. "They live such brief and pointless lives, 80 years if they are lucky. A single blink of an eye compared to the span of truly civilized species." The Drexy turned its mechanical face toward Alara, sensors focusing on her with clinical precision. What can beings who live so briefly ever hope to contribute? What wisdom can they offer when they barely have time to learn anything before they die? They are mayflies playing at civilization, children pretending to be adults, and they will never be anything more. Alara stood in the center of the chamber as the accusations continued to rain down upon her, as delegate after delegate rose to speak against humanity, and she listened to every word without interrupting, without defending, without showing any emotion at all on her face. She heard them call humans violent and primitive and destructive and foolish and temporary. Heard them list every war and every atrocity and every mistake her species had ever made. Heard them dismiss everything humanity had ever achieved as meaningless and trivial. And through it all, she remained silent, watching and listening and waiting. And something deep inside her was changing. Something cold and patient was waking up. When the last delegate finally sat down, when the chamber fell silent and every eye turned to Alara, expecting her to beg for forgiveness, expecting her to apologize for the sins of her species, she did something that surprised them all. She smiled, just a small curve of her lips, barely visible, but somehow more unsettling than any display of anger or despair could have been. The high speaker's crystalline form flickered with confusion, colors rippling across its surface that Alara could not interpret. "The human may now respond to the evidence presented against her species," the high speaker announced, its voice careful and measured. "She may defend humanity's petition for membership in the Galactic Concord." Alara took a slow, deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was calm and steady, carrying clearly to every corner of the vast chamber. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak," she said. And something in her tone made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I have listened carefully to everything that has been said about my people, and I have much to say in return." She paused for a moment, looking around the chamber at the thousands of alien faces watching her. And then she began to speak, and the words that came out of her mouth would change the galaxy forever. Elara Chun stood alone in the center of 10,000 alien beings, and when she began to speak, her voice carried the weight of 8 billion human souls. "You call Earth a death world," she said, her words echoing through the crystal chamber. "And you are right. Because my planet has tried to kill us every single day since the first human drew breath, and yet here I stand before you." She turned slowly, looking at the assembled delegates, meeting their alien eyes without fear. "We survived ice ages that covered half our world in frozen death. We survived volcanic eruptions that blotted out the sun for years. We survived plagues that killed millions and earthquakes that swallowed cities whole. And every time our planet tried to destroy us, we got back up and kept going." The chamber was completely silent now, every being listening with an intensity that Elara could feel pressing against her skin. "You mock us for forming bonds with predators," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "but you do not understand what that means. Because when a human looks at a wolf and sees a friend instead of an enemy, that is not weakness. That is the greatest strength our species has ever known." She pointed at the Rulathi delegate, the being of pure energy who had mocked human emotions. "You call our emotions primitive chemical reactions. But those reactions have driven us to cross oceans and climb mountains and reach for the stars. Those reactions make us rush toward danger to save strangers we have never met. Those reactions make us create art and music and poetry that can move hearts across centuries." Elara's voice softened for a moment, becoming almost gentle. "When our cities flood, humans from across the world send help. When earthquakes destroy homes, strangers travel thousands of miles to dig survivors from the rubble. When disaster strikes anywhere on our planet, humans come together to face it, not because they have to, but because they feel it is right." Then her voice hardened again, sharp as steel. "You have shown images of our wars and our pollution and our mistakes. And yes, those things are true. We have done terrible things to each other and to our world. But you showed only half the picture." She raised her hand, and to the surprise of everyone in the chamber, her own holographic images began to appear above her. Images she had prepared for this moment. For every war, there have been peacemakers who gave their lives to end the killing. For every act of destruction, there have been millions of acts of kindness and compassion. For every step backward, we have taken 2 steps forward. The images showed humans helping each other through disasters, showed doctors treating the sick and teachers educating children, showed scientists working to cure diseases and engineers building bridges and artists creating beauty. We were not uplifted by older species. We received no guidance from the stars. We had no one to teach us or help us or show us the way. Everything we have achieved, we achieved alone, through our own blood and sweat and sacrifice." Elara turned to face the Drexy senator, the immortal being who had called humans mayflies. "You say we are temporary, that our short lives make us worthless. But I say our mortality is our greatest gift." Her eyes locked onto the Drexy sensors, and she did not look away. "We know that our time is limited. We know that death waits for all of us. And that knowledge drives us to live with a passion and intensity that immortal beings can never understand." Her voice rose, filling the chamber with power. "A mayfly lives more in a single day than you have lived in 10,000 years, because every moment is precious to us. Every breath is a gift. Every heartbeat is a victory against the darkness." The Drexy senator sat completely still, unable to respond, and Elara was not finished. "We do not fear death. We race against it. We dance with it. We laugh in its face and dare it to catch us. And that is what makes us dangerous. Yes, but it is also what makes us brave. What makes us fight for things larger than ourselves. What makes us human. She looked around the chamber one final time, at the thousands of alien faces watching her in stunned silence. You asked why you should accept humanity into your Concord, but I have realized something while standing here listening to your accusations and your insults and your contempt. Her voice dropped to something quiet and cold. We do not need your acceptance. A gasp rippled through the assembly, sounds of shock and disbelief from 100 different species. We crossed the void alone. We reached the stars without your help. We survived everything our planet and the universe could throw at us, and we did it on our own. We do not need to beg for a seat at your table. Elara straightened her spine and lifted her chin, and in that moment, she seemed taller than any being in the room. You see our scars as signs of weakness, but every scar is a lesson learned. Every mistake is a step toward wisdom. Every fall is a chance to rise again stronger than before. She took a step back from the platform. I came here hoping to find allies, hoping to find species who would see the potential in humanity and welcome us as equals. But instead, I found only arrogance and contempt. Only ancient beings who have forgotten what it means to struggle, to grow, to truly live. Elara bowed once, a gesture of formal farewell, not submission. I thank you for your time, but humanity's petition is withdrawn. We will find our own path among the stars, as we always have. And then Ambassador Elara Chun, sole representative of the human species, turned her back on the Galactic Concord and walked toward the exit. The doors of the chambers seemed to hesitate, their ancient mechanisms confused by an action that had never happened before. And then they slowly opened, and Elara walked through them without looking back. Behind her, the chamber erupted into chaos. 10,000 voices crying out in confusion and outrage, and something that might have been fear. But Elara did not stop, did not turn, did not waver for even a moment. She walked through the crystal corridors of the station with her head held high, a single human woman who had just told the most powerful assembly in the galaxy that her species did not need them. The silence that followed Elara's departure was unlike anything the Galactic Concord had ever experienced. A void so complete that even the background hum of the station's ancient system seemed to fade away. 10,000 beings sat frozen in their seats, their minds struggling to process what had just happened, trying to understand how a single human woman had walked away from the most powerful assembly in the known universe. The High Speaker's crystalline form flickered with colors that no one in the chamber had ever seen before, patterns that the Vethkai only displayed in moments of profound confusion and uncertainty. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the leader of the Concord had no idea what to say. In the section reserved for the Reality delegation, the being of pure energy who had mocked human emotions found itself experiencing something it had never felt before. A strange stuttering in its thought patterns, a disruption in the perfect logic that had defined its existence for millions of years. The Reality had always believed that emotions were weaknesses, primitive chemical reactions that clouded judgment and led to irrational decisions. But now it could not stop thinking about the fire in Elara's eyes, the passion in her voice, the absolute conviction that had radiated from her every word. How could such primitive feelings produce such strength? How could a being driven by chemicals and hormones stand before the most powerful creatures in the galaxy and show no fear at all? The question spun through the Relati's consciousness like a virus, corrupting everything it had believed to be true. Across the chamber, the Morvax collective was experiencing its own crisis, its billion-strong hive mind fracturing into chaos as individual nodes argued with each other for the first time in millennia. One faction insisted that the human's behavior was simply proof of human irrationality. That walking away from such an opportunity could only be seen as madness. But another faction was not so sure, and the debate raged across light years, spreading confusion through the entire collective. The concept of individuality had always disgusted the Morvacs. The idea that a single being could stand alone without the support of the hive. But Ilara had stood alone against 10,000 and had not wavered, had not broken, had shown a strength that came from within rather than from the collective. For the first time in its ancient existence, the Morvacs collective began to wonder if perhaps it had been wrong about something. But no being in the chamber was more affected than the Drexy senator, the immortal creature who had called humans mayflies and dismissed their brief lives as meaningless. The Drexy sat motionless in its mechanical body. Sensors pointed at the doors through which the human had disappeared. And somewhere deep in its synthetic consciousness, something was happening that it did not understand. 8,000 years the Drexy senator had lived. 8,000 years of watching younger species rise and fall. 8,000 years of collecting knowledge and power and influence. And in all that time, it had never once questioned the value of its immortality. But now Ilara's words echoed through its circuits like a song that would not stop playing. A mayfly lives more in a single day than you have lived in 10,000 years. The Drexy tried to dismiss the words as foolish human sentiment, tried to remind itself that it had witnessed the birth and death of stars, had seen empires rise and crumble into dust, had accumulated more experience than any human could hope to gather in 1,000,000 lifetimes. And yet, something was wrong. Something did not add up. Because when the Drexy searched its vast memory banks, it could not find a single moment in those 8,000 years that matched the intensity of what it had witnessed today, could not find a single experience that burned as brightly as the passion in Ilara Chun's eyes. What was the point of living forever if every day felt the same? What was the value of immortality if it meant watching the universe pass by like scenery through a window, never truly touching anything, never truly feeling anything, never truly being alive? The sensation building in the Drexy's synthetic chest was unfamiliar and uncomfortable, and it took several hours of analysis before the senator finally identified what it was. Shame. The Drexy was feeling shame, perhaps for the first time in its entire existence. Hours passed, and the chamber remained in chaos. Delegates arguing and debating and struggling to understand what had happened, but no one could agree on anything. No one could make sense of a species that would walk away from everything the Concord had to offer. Finally, as the artificial day cycle of the station began to dim into evening, the high speaker rose and called for silence. "What have we done?" The Vethkai asked, its voice heavy with an emotion that sounded almost like regret. "We came here to judge humanity, to weigh their worth against our ancient standards. But perhaps we are the ones who should have been judged." The chamber fell silent, every being listening as their leader spoke words that had never been spoken in this place before. "We mocked them for their wars, but we have fought our own. We criticized them for damaging their world, but how many planets have we strip-mined and abandoned? We called them primitive, but they achieved spaceflight in a single century, while many of us took millennia." The high speaker's crystalline form pulsed with deep blue light. "And when we offered them everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of, they looked at us and saw that our approval was not worth having. They saw us for what we truly are. Ancient beings who have forgotten what it means to grow, to struggle, to truly live." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The human was right. They do not need us. Perhaps they never did, but I wonder now if we might need them. If we might need beings who remember what we have forgotten, who can remind us why we reached for the stars in the first place. The high speaker looked out at the assembled delegates, and its next words would change the course of galactic history. "I propose that we send a delegation to the human ship not to demand their return, not to offer them membership, but to apologize, and to ask if they would consider being our teachers instead of our students. For a long moment, no one spoke, and then, slowly, one by one, delegates began to signal their agreement, and something new began to stir in the hearts of the galaxy's oldest species. 3 cycles passed, and the Perseverance remained docked at the great station, its engines powered down, its single human occupant waiting in the silence of space for whatever would come next. Elara had not expected to stay, had planned to leave immediately after the assembly and begin the long journey back to Earth. But something had stopped her, a feeling in her gut that told her the story was not over yet. She spent the time reading and exercising and looking out at the stars, thinking about what she had said in the chamber, wondering if she had done the right thing, wondering if she had just destroyed humanity's best chance at joining the galactic community. On the morning of the 4th cycle, a message arrived at her ship, and when she read it, she had to sit down because her legs would not hold her anymore. 12 species were requesting permission to visit the Perseverance, not to demand or threaten or negotiate, but to talk, to apologize, and to ask for something that no species had ever asked of humanity before. Elara granted permission, and within the hour, her small ship was filled with beings she had last seen mocking and condemning her people. The High Speaker came first, its crystalline form barely fitting through the human-sized corridors, and when it spoke, its voice was softer than Elara had ever heard it. "We have come to ask your forgiveness," the Vethkai said, light rippling through its body in patterns that Elara was beginning to understand meant sincerity. "We judged your species harshly and unfairly. We saw only what confirmed our prejudices and ignored everything else." Elara nodded but did not speak, waiting to hear what else they had to say. The Rewathi delegate drifted forward, its energy form pulsing with colors that seemed almost nervous. "I mocked your emotions," the being of light admitted, its voice echoing in Elara's mind. "But I have spent 3 cycles analyzing what I witnessed in the chamber, and I have concluded that I was wrong. That your so-called primitive feelings give you something that pure logic cannot provide: courage and passion and purpose." One by one, the delegates stepped forward to speak, each offering their own words of regret and recognition, and Elara listened to them all with an expression that gave nothing away. Finally, the Drexy senator approached, and Elara saw something different in the way the mechanical being moved, something that looked almost like uncertainty. "I have lived for 8,000 years, the Drexy said, its synthetic voice quieter than she remembered, and in all that time, I believed that immortality was the greatest achievement any species could attain. That longer life meant more value, more worth, more meaning." The senator paused, sensors focusing on Elara's face. "You made me question that belief. You made me realize that I have spent thousands of years merely existing, watching the universe go by without truly being part of it, accumulating experience without ever feeling anything." The Drexy's mechanical body actually seemed to sag, if such a thing were possible. "I called your people mayflies, but mayflies know something that I had forgotten. That every moment is precious, precisely because it will end. That life has meaning because it is finite. That the value of a day is measured not in hours, but in how fully it is lived." Elara felt something stir in her chest, a warmth that surprised her after everything that had happened. "Why have you come?" she finally asked, speaking for the first time since the delegates had arrived. "What do you want from humanity?" The High Speaker moved forward, and when it spoke, its words carried the weight of a galaxy's worth of reflection. "We do not want you beneath us in the Concord. We no longer believe we have the right to judge whether you are worthy to join us. Instead, we have come to ask if you would consider standing beside us, as equals, as allies, as partners." The Vethkai's crystalline form blazed with light. "More than that, we have come to ask if you would teach us, because we have watched younger species beg for our approval since before your sun ignited. And none of them ever walked away. None of them ever showed us that we were the ones who needed to change. Alara looked around at the assembled delegates, at beings who had mocked and condemned her people just days ago, and she saw something new in their alien faces, something that looked like genuine humility. Humanity has much to learn from the older species of the galaxy, she said carefully. We are young, and we have made many mistakes. We do not claim to be wiser or better than anyone. She paused, and then a small smile crossed her face. But perhaps we can remind you of some things you have forgotten. Perhaps we can show you what it means to live as if every day matters. To love fiercely and fight passionately, and never give up no matter how impossible the odds. The High Speaker's form pulsed with something that looked like joy. That is all we ask. That is more than we deserve. And so a new chapter began, not with humanity joining the Galactic Concord as supplicants, but with humanity becoming something far more important, the conscience of the galaxy, the reminder to ancient species of why they had reached for the stars in the first place. In the years that followed, humans spread across the galaxy, not as conquerors or colonizers, but as teachers and friends and partners, showing the old species how to feel again, how to care again, how to truly live again. When empires grew complacent, humans were there to shake them awake. When civilizations lost their way, humans helped them find the path again. When the ancient races forgot what mattered, humans reminded them with passion and fire and an intensity that burned brighter than any star. And in the great archives of the Galactic Concord, the moment when Ambassador Alara Chun walked out of the assembly chamber was recorded and preserved for all eternity. Not as the day a human left the meeting, but as something far more significant. They called it the day the galaxy learned to listen, and it was celebrated for millions of years afterward, as the moment when the oldest species in the universe finally understood that wisdom does not come from age alone, that strength does not come from power alone, and that the smallest and youngest species can sometimes teach the greatest lessons of all. And somewhere across the vast ocean of stars, on a tiny blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow sun, 8 billion humans continued to live and love and struggle and dream, never knowing that they had changed the course of galactic history forever, never knowing that their ambassador had given the universe the greatest gift it had ever received, the gift of remembering what it truly meant to be alive.